Welcome to the IT Fundamentals Training Series. This is your host, Mark Halpton. This is episode 41. We're still in the operating system management function. And today we're going to talk about how to deal with managing devices and looking at driver details. Let's get started. Welcome to the IT Fundamentals Training Series. I'm your host, Mark Haupt. Today is device management, or really it's managing the operating system. Now on to part 3. And so today we're going to talk about device management. So yesterday we talked about how to manage the applications, and we kind of talked about that whole services tab and how that is an interaction, if you will, between the application and the operating system, how it can take configuration settings and move it down to a hardware piece. Now, when we're talking about device management, we're going to be kind of getting back into the driver function. And if you remember, drivers are that interface between the operating system and the hardware. Now, typical operating systems today, whether it's Windows and Linux or the iOS, they will come with baseline or basic drivers that will operate against basic hardware out there. But if you want to get the real functionality out of a piece of hardware, you're going to download that driver from the OEM, or the original equipment manufacturer. The OEM, the original equipment manufacturer, is a term that we use a lot in IT. So that's one you want to get used to, even though it's not necessarily in the book here. But anyway, the OEM is the company, the manufacturer that built the piece of hardware. Because remember, computers are not just built by Dell or Hewlett Packard or whoever it might be. They actually take components from multiple sources and bring them together inside of one chassis or one case. So, for example, your network interface card that you have built onto your motherboard or your system board is not going to be the one that's actually manufactured by that system board. They're actually taking that network interface card and from another company and building that onto very frequently. That's the same thing with displays or monitor type of drivers. Or another one is a very common is the audio driver, for example. Yeah, Windows comes with a basic audio driver, but you really want nice, good quality sound. You're going to take it to that next level by going and downloading the audio driver from Sound Blaster or someone like that that is manufacturing the actual driver or the actual hardware that's on your computer. So that's kind of one of the things you see in 4.34. All right, device manager. Getting to device manager is, again, one of the Windows X and type in device manager, and that should be able to pop that up on your screen for you. Device manager 4.33 shows a good shot there of the baseline of the device manager. It will show you at a high level all of your different components that could be a part of your computer. Now, you'll notice that off to the left of that on page 225, 4.33 is the figure that we're looking at. You see it says the desktop, the computer name, and then underneath that it lists your audio inputs and computer disk drive, so on and so forth. It's got a little arrow next to that. If you click that arrow, and that will open it up, and it will actually show the hardware that's attached to your computer underneath that. Once you show that hardware, which is what you see in figure 4.34, you can then right click on that hardware and you can configure that hardware and look at the drivers that are attached to it and so on and so forth. So if you want to, as exampled in 4.34 here, if you wanted to increase the capability of your Sound Blaster XFI Extreme Audio, then what you can do is you can right click on that digital audio device that's in your device manager, and you can either look at the device details button by looking at the driver tab. You can do an update driver, which will go out to the internet and it will look for a better driver to put on your system. But you can also, if it's also conflicting with your system for some reason, for example, maybe your system, as in the description or the picture there in 4.34, is perhaps it's showing that there's 2 different installations there. You may disable one of them or even uninstall one of them. So there's multiple ways to address driver management from that window there. Now, one of the items they have grayed out there is also important. It's called rollback driver. Lots of times, if you update the driver, perhaps that that particular device is not functioning. Maybe you've accidentally put the wrong driver on the computer manually, for example. What you can do is you can roll back, in other words, uninstall the driver. Because remember, drivers, just like the services, are a piece of software that's built into or is added onto the operating system that allows it to interface with the hardware. So it is a piece of software that you can, what we call roll back. When you uninstall a driver, you're not uninstalling it, you're rolling it back, is typically what you're doing. When you're uninstalling the device, when you select that uninstall device, you're actually removing, not physically, but logically removing the device from your computer. Now, the value of uninstalling the device is that you can then reboot your computer. And the way the Windows operating system works is it will detect any hardware that doesn't have a driver that's associated with it. And in doing so, it will reinstall the driver for you, the baseline driver that comes with Windows OS. And so you can kind of start over, if you will, by doing that uninstall. Now, if you're having a conflict and a problem with your audio device itself, in this particular case, or let's say a disk drive or something else, and you don't want it to you do not want it to reinstall when you reboot and try and reconfigure when you reboot, you can hit the disable device. And what that will do is that will put it into a dormant state, and it tells the operating system when you reboot, don't reactivate this device. So that's how you can kind of play around with these drivers a little bit. Under the general tab, that's where you can configure drivers. So if you're using a network interface card, for example, you can put in the IP addresses, you can put in DNS addresses manually instead of automatic. The details and the events tabs on that will show you various details and events that are going on with that. So if there's been a failure, for example, underneath the events, it might show you some of the log files or some of the details of that event that is causing a problem. All right, the other thing that we talk about in devices is how to install the devices. So there's a couple of ways. You'll notice that on that tab, on that driver tab that we were just looking at, we talked about how the system will automatically find the hardware, but you'll notice that there is not an install driver or an install hardware on that tab. Now, in reality, if you go to 4.33 and you click on some of the things like file or action, there are tabs underneath that will allow you to install. But the easier way to install a new piece of hardware is if you actually go to the devices section under settings, where, for example, if you want to install a printer, you can click on the button in there that will specifically be looking for printers or a mouse or typing keyboards, things like that. The one that they show you and figured out 4.32 is Bluetooth and other devices. So if we were to walk through the process, let's say this headset that I have on right now, when I connected that to the computer, I needed to pair the device. So there's a function within my headset that allows it to connect to the Bluetooth function on the computer. But in order for that to work, you actually have to do a little bit of manual interaction. So you would click on that add Bluetooth or other devices with my headset in pairing mode. So in other words, in the mode on the headset itself that's broadcasting a, hey, I want to connect to you type of message to the computer. Clicking on the button in 4.32 there that says add Bluetooth or other device will put the computer in the same pairing, or, hey, I'm allowing you to connect to me mode. So from that point, then there will be, depending on the type of device, there will be some steps that you have to go through, or perhaps it will automatically connect. And you can do that with your audio devices, with your headsets, with your mouse, keyboard, pens, all that kind of stuff. So you can go into that settings page and you can work through that process by simply clicking on the add whatever it is type of button. All right, so that's how we deal with the devices themselves. Our next function, our next discussion, will be dealing with disk space management and memory management. And we'll get to that on page 226 and 227 in episode 42 as we move forward with this. But this is episode 41. And I hope you've had a good added bit, if you will, of discussion and understanding, because the paragraphs here were rather small, but I hope that kind of gave you a little bit of a better in-depth understanding of how these images at 4.33 and 3.4 and 3.2 work. I would recommend that you go give do the hands-on function and go into your own computer, perhaps play around with these kinds of things. I don't recommend necessarily disabling or uninstalling a device, because that could mess some key things up, not until you get a little bit more experience. But feel free to hit the update driver. The worst thing that will happen there is you'll update a driver. Probably what will happen is it will go out on the internet and look and say, oh, you're already got the latest updates to that driver, so you don't need to do anything. And away it goes. So, click on driver details, just kind of look at that, some of the hex code and things in there to become familiar with it. So, anyway, episode 41's in the books. We will talk to you later. Hopefully you will have a good day, and I look forward to more communication with you.